The Spitfire pilot, Flight Lieutenant James "Mac" MacDonald, had him, dead to rights. It was the height of the Battle of Britain, late August 1940. Mac's Supermarine Spitfire Mky was a blur of polished aluminum chasing a Messerschmitt Bf 109E4 through the ragged clouds above Kent. The German pilot, realizing his mistake, had only one chance left, a desperate, gravity-defying maneuver known as bunting, shoving the stick forward into a vertical negative G dive. Mac didn't hesitate. He was trained to stay on the enemy's tail, no matter what. He followed the 109, pushing his own stick forward to mirror the brutal descent. In that instant, every ounce of force pulled him out of his seat. His body strained against the straps. But something else was happening. Deep within the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the fuel line choked. A sound that no fighter pilot ever wants to hear replaced the roar of the mighty engine. Silence. The RPMs dropped to nothing. The Spitfire, the pride of the Royal Air Force, became a 7,000-pound glider, floating helplessly in a dive. The German pilot, once doomed, pulled out of his descent, rolled his 109, and looked back at his powerless, frozen adversary. It wasn't just a technical glitch, it was an executioner's reprieve, a fatal design flaw that was silently killing the RAF. What Mac had just experienced wasn't bad luck. It was a deadly, predictable consequence of two competing philosophies forged in the infancy of flight. The heart of the problem was the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine's fuel system, a float chamber carburetor. To simplify, imagine a toilet tank. That float needs gravity to work correctly. When Mac pushed his plane into that negative G dive, the fuel float rose as if the plane were inverted, starving the engine of fuel. For a critical 3 to 5 seconds, an eternity in a dogfight, the engine coughed, sputtered, and died. This was the death ratio problem for the British, their fatal engineering flaw. The German equivalent, the Daimler-Benz DB601 engine powering the Bf 109, was equipped with a sophisticated fuel injection system. This sealed, pressurized mechanism delivered fuel directly to the cylinders, entirely independent of gravity. Where the Spitfire was crippled by a dive, the Bf 109 could exploit the move, using negative G maneuvers to shake off an enemy and immediately counterattack. This wasn't a fair fight. It was a lethal geometric certainty. The German pilots knew the trick. If you're stuck, just bunt into a hard dive. Your enemy will follow, their engine will choke, and you'll have a clean getaway, or worse, an easy kill. This technical mismatch was killing Britain's best pilots faster than the enemy's guns could. The term used in the mess halls and the briefing rooms wasn't engine failure. It was the 109's get-out-of-jail-free card. This technical superiority translated into a horrifying, measurable loss of life. Consider the calculus. In every dogfight, where RAE Spitfire gained a tactical advantage, the German pilot could instantly neutralize the threat by simply pushing forward. The RAF pilot would stall, and the 109 would escape. The advantage shifted entirely on the axis of gravity, not skill. This structural flaw meant Britain was losing pilots, the very resource they could least afford to lose. Not to superior flying, but to a basic engineering bottleneck. A 50-cent component, a simple solution, was missing, and for that omission, men were paying the ultimate price. The mounting reports detailing planes lost after engaging in a vertical dive painted a grim, repetitive pattern. Pilots were being handed an unbeatable formula for death, right in the machine they were supposed to trust with their lives. This was the silent, brutal arithmetic of the Battle of Britain. The Air Ministry had assembled the greatest minds in Britain to address this flaw, yet they offered only proposals measured in years and millions of pounds. But the solution wasn't found in a grand lecture hall by a titled academic. It was found by an unlikely genius in a jumpsuit, Beatrice Shilling. At 31, Tilly was an engineer at the Royal Aircraft Establishment, RAE, but she was hardly the typical establishment figure. Imagine a woman who rode her custom-built Norton motorbike, which she tuned herself, at speeds of 101 miles per hour, beating most of the men on the track. This was Tilly, brilliant, utterly unconventional, and happiest with a wrench in her hand and oil on her fingers. She was an outsider in the military engineering complex, a civilian woman daring to critique the sacred Rolls-Royce Merlin. This mirrored the predicament of Walter Kowalski, the untrained mechanic. While the authorities proposed a full engine refit, Tilly saw the problem not as a theoretical physics challenge, but as a quick, desperate fix needed by the boys she saw flying overhead. Her unique blend of mechanical expertise, audacious speed, and refusal to respect institutional dogma made her the perfect, overlooked underdog to tackle a problem that was killing the heroes of the nation. The official solution, backed by the full weight of the Royal Aircraft Establishment, was a complex pressurized fuel system, a complete redesign that would take years and ground the entire fighter fleet. The consensus was that nothing simple could fix a flaw in the Merlin's core design, but Tilly Shilling dismissed consensus. She saw a problem of fluid dynamics, not high engineering theory. She reached for the simplest possible solution, mirroring John Thatch's use of 2 matchsticks to solve naval tactics. Her moment of clarity didn't involve complex schematics. It involved a tiny, humble piece of brass, a metal washer, no bigger than a thimble, which cost less than a shilling, about 50 cents in modern terms. She ordered this washer to be precision machined with a small, calibrated hole at its center. This component was designed to be fitted, invisibly, directly into the carburetor's supply line. This tiny brass ring was officially and rather infamously dubbed the RAE Restrictor, but soon earned the blunt, memorable nickname Miss Shilling's Orifice. It was a slap in the face to the high-minded engineers, a cheap, fast, field-installable fix for a multi-million-pound problem. The beauty of this aha moment was its sheer simplicity, focusing on restriction rather than elimination, immediately creating a powerful sense of awe for the audience. Tilly Shilling's idea was not a revolution. It was an incredibly clever compromise. The problem was fuel flooding under -G, which choked the engine. Her solution, Miss Shilling's Orifice, didn't solve the core design flaw. The carburetor still flooded, but it acted as a precise flow restrictor. Imagine a garden hose with a thumb pressed over the end. The washer dramatically reduced the cross-sectional area of the fuel line. When the float rose during a -G dive, the fuel still tried to rush out and flood the chambers, but the tiny hole throttled the flow. It regulated the fuel, releasing it slowly enough that the engine could process it without choking. This single 50-cent component gave the pilot a critical 3 to 5 seconds of continuous, if reduced, power. That brief, continuous surge was the difference between a helpless stall and staying on the enemy's tail. It transformed the BF-109's get-out-of-jail-free card into an unreliable gamble, restoring the Spitfire's maneuverability and immediately giving the RAF the tactical edge they desperately needed. Tilly Shilling had a 50-cent fix for a problem that was actively losing the Battle of Britain. The question, then, is why wasn't this tiny component instantly adopted by every single squadron? The answer, as always, was the wall of institutional inertia. To the engineers at the Air Ministry, the RAE Restrictor was heresy. It was, in their view, a crude, tinker shop field modification for a world-class engine designed by Rolls-Royce, the pinnacle of British engineering pride. They demanded a proper, complex solution, a total redesign of the fuel system that honored the engine's legacy. This simple washer, they argued, violated every principle of safety and precision. It was an unacceptable shortcut, a violation of safety rules, comparable to Kowalski's backwards loading, despite saving lives. This intellectual arrogance led to a tense standoff. The bureaucracy wanted an official, slow-moving program that validated their own expertise. They didn't want to admit that a junior female engineer had solved their billion-pound problem with a dime store component. This frustrating impasse meant that while pilots were dying daily due to the fatal silence, the official word was, "The design is sound. The pilots need better training." The real enemy was not the German Air Force in this moment, but the stubborn pride and institutional resistance to change, forcing Tilly and her solution into a desperate, covert path to save the fighter force. The bureaucracy was moving at the speed of official memos. The German Air Force was moving at 400 miles per hour. While the committees debated the merits of a tinker shop fix versus an official redesign, Tilly Shilling knew that every day of delay meant more pilots were being lost to the fatal stall. With the silent backing of a few sympathetic RAE officers, her own version of Sergeant Miller keeping quiet, Tilly organized a desperate covert operation. She assembled a small team of engineers and mechanics, and they began traveling across Britain in a battered, unmarked van. This wasn't an official deployment. It was a race against time carried out under the veil of routine maintenance. Working day and night, often sleeping on hangar floors, they visited critical RAF fighter stations, Hornchurch, Biggin Hill, Duxford, personally installing the little brass washer. This was mechanical defiance. Her team was essentially breaking the rules to save lives, bypassing the paper pushers to get the fix to the men who needed it. Each restrictor was hand-fitted into the carburetor, an act of silent, unauthorized rebellion. This urgency and sense of risk created enormous dramatic tension. If they were caught, they faced professional ruin. If they succeeded, they would save the lives of pilots who had no idea they were about to receive a life-saving miracle from a woman they had never met. The fate of the entire fighter command now rested on a small, unofficial team and their 50-cent washer. Months after Tilly's unofficial mission began, the pilot started noticing the difference. We now returned to an anonymous cockpit, somewhere above the English Channel, for the ultimate tension release. A Spitfire, having engaged a Bf-109, watches as the German pilot executes the maneuver that should guarantee his escape, the violent negative G bunt into a deep dive. He performs the maneuver perfectly, a trained confidence in the knowledge that the pursuing British pilot will soon be wrestling with a dead engine. But this time the fatal silence did not come. Instead of stalling, the Spitfire's engine, with Miss Shilling's orifice discreetly restricting the flow, gave a momentary shudder, then held. The engine caught, the propeller continued to claw at the air, and the Spitfire stuck to the German's tail like a shadow. For the Bf-109 pilot, this was a terrifying, impossible shock. The rules of the air, which had kept him safe for months, had just been rewritten by a 50-cent piece of brass. The hunter had suddenly become the hunted. The Spitfire pilot, no longer shackled by the carburetor flaw, pressed his attack. The German realized his get-out-of-jail-free card was now an obsolete death sentence. This moment, replicated across countless dogfights, was the first taste of true victory. The RAF could now fight on equal terms, not thanks to a new engine, but thanks to a woman who refused to let an engineering error kill her nation's fighting spirit. The most compelling proof of Tilly Shilling's genius did not come from a laboratory experiment. It came from the raw, unfiltered combat reports flooding back from the RAF squadrons. This was the moment of irrefutable proof, the equivalent of the improved kill ratios seen after Kowalski's invention. Before the rollout of the restrictor, a grim pattern dominated the official records. Pilot after pilot reporting.
Enemy aircraft evaded pursuit by executing a vertical dive. This was the before state, the cold data confirming the BF-109's get-out-of-jail-free card. Then came the after state. As Tilley's small team completed their covert modification of squadrons like 611 and 19, the language in the operational records changed dramatically. Suddenly, reports read, "Pursued enemy in deep dive, maintained power, resulting in kill confirmed." The evidence was empirical, overwhelming, and impossible for the Air Ministry to dismiss. The restrictor didn't give the Merlin a new fuel system, but it changed the tactical geometry of the fight. The BF-109 pilot, relying on his escape move, was now gambling his life on an obsolete rule. The shift in combat reports acted as the ultimate statistical climax, the data-driven smoking gun. The Air Ministry, which had scorned the tinker shop fix for months, was forced to accept the undeniable facts. A 50-cent washer was now the most critical component in their billion-pound fighter force, the only reason their best pilots were returning home. The debate was over. The data had spoken. The combat reports were the irrefutable evidence, but data alone rarely defeats bureaucracy. The adoption of Miss Shilling's invention required a yes ladder of escalating endorsements, precisely mirroring how Kowalski's backward loading moved from a sergeant's secret to Patton's doctrine. First, the fighter pilots themselves, the ultimate arbiters of battlefield effectiveness, began demanding the fix. Squadron commanders, seeing their survival rates instantly jump, ignored the Air Ministry's objections and ordered their ground crews to install the restrictors if Tilley's team hadn't already. This was the first vital rung. Next, group commanders, tasked with overall operational losses, saw the quantifiable drop in stalled-in dive reports and issued their own, increasingly firm internal mandates. Finally, the evidence became too overwhelming to ignore. The Air Ministry, forced to confront the superior performance of the modified planes, reluctantly reversed their position. The improper fix, the 50-cent washer, was officially adopted as standard-issue, life-saving doctrine for the entire fighter command. Orders were issued across the whole manufacturing chain. Every single new Rolls-Royce Merlin engine destined for a Spitfire or Hurricane would have Miss Shilling's Orifice fitted before it ever left the factory. The innovator versus system conflict was resolved. The genius of a practical outsider had triumphed over the pride of the institutional elite. The ultimate quantification of Tilly Shilling's work is staggering. By giving the Spitfire its missing maneuverability, by essentially neutralizing the BF-109's single greatest tactical advantage, Miss Shilling's Orifice transformed the air war. The true victory wasn't just in the number of German planes shot down, but in the lives saved. The final estimate, derived from combat losses before and after the restrictor's full adoption, suggests that Beatrice Shilling's 50-cent washer saved the lives of an estimated 2,100 RAF pilots. This is the massive value payoff that anchors the entire narrative, fulfilling the promise of the title. This wasn't a minor mechanical improvement. It was a foundational shift in the calculus of the air campaign. Imagine the Spitfire squadrons, the men who stood between Britain and invasion, returning to base, knowing they had a fighting chance where before they had a death sentence. The Battle of Britain and the subsequent air war over Europe may very well have been decided by this single tiny piece of brass. It represents a victory of pragmatism over pride, a triumph that protected the men who would become the few and ensured their continued survival. This one woman and her humble innovation guaranteed that thousands of fathers, brothers, and sons would return home. The narrative of Beatrice Shilling culminates not in fanfare or a state funeral, but in a profound quietude. Much like Walter Kowalski, the untrained mechanic who invented a life-saving loading method, Tilly Shilling received no major military medal for her single, pivotal war-winning innovation. She was an engineer, and in the institutional view, she was simply performing her duty, a duty that happened to save the entire fighter command. Her true legacy is not a citation on a wall, but an enduring, invisible force. The sheer volume of human history her washer enabled. It's the thousands of families whose lineage continued because their grandfather was no longer a casualty of the fatal silence. It's the father who came home, the photograph that was taken, the life that was lived, all because a stubborn, fast-riding woman ignored the bureaucracy and found a 50-cent answer to a billion-pound problem. This is the emotional denouement, a powerful reminder that the greatest heroes often operate quietly, their reward found not in metal badges, but in the untold stories of those they saved. We've spent the last 12 minutes charting the course of a seemingly impossible problem, a fatal engine flaw, and tracking the journey of its radical grassroots solution. We've seen the sheer tension of the dogfights, the frustration of fighting bureaucracy, and the eventual triumph quantified in 100 lives saved. We've looked at the past, at the desperation and the heroism, but now our focus shifts.
Because the ultimate preservation of this history is up to you. The medal never came for Beatrice Shilling, but her story, like the story of the Thatch Weave and the Kowalski Load, is a testament to the fact that ingenuity always defeats inertia. You are the only thing that keeps that essential lesson alive, preventing it from disappearing into the silence of forgotten archives. If this remarkable story of a simple washer saving 2,100 lives, the ultimate triumph of ingenuity over inertia, moved you, please take a moment to help us ensure this legacy continues. Hit that like button right now. Every single like signals to the algorithm that this history matters, allowing us to share more forgotten stories like Tilly's. And hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You're not just a viewer. You're part of a global community dedicated to rescuing these untold histories from dusty archives. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure the true heroes of the war are always remembered.